Hi everyone, Natasha here, and around my home today I am in my office. We just had a summer storm blow through, so things have settled back down. And I wanted to share with you my simple budgeting system and go into how I use some of my favorite Jane's Agenda inserts to set up my budget each month and to keep up with it every week. So stay tuned for that, and welcome to my office. Welcome back to my home. I'm so glad you're joining me today. As I mentioned, this is my simple budgeting system we're going to be going through, but I by no means am any sort of financial expert. So take this for what it is. It's just the system that I landed on that made the most sense to me. It worked with my brain. It felt like something I could keep up with, and it didn't get too complicated. Of course, if you're fine with your budget, then this may not be the video for you, but I really struggled over the last 10, 15 years of my adult life I would create a really complicated budget, and then it was so complicated I wouldn't get back in there and update it as the month went along. And I did that in various forms and fashions, off and on, and finally I decided to just simplify it and keep what is essentially a paycheck budget, but it helped me to write it out in this fashion that I'm going to be showing you. And that allowed me to really get a better handle on where my money was going every day and what bills were coming up. And from there, I've been able to build a little more thorough budgeting system, but I needed to start at this very basic level in order to just have something that I could keep up with. So my hope is that if you're like me and your brain has had trouble coming up with a good budgeting system, maybe this will give you some ideas or a basic system that you can try. And like I said, just find a way to make it work and build what works from there for you. So I have a couple of inserts here. We'll go through those in just a minute. The only other supplies you'll need is either a pencil or a pen. I like to use the friction erasable pens because we're working with numbers and inevitably I need to erase things. So if you prefer pencil, do that, but I do think it's nice to have something that's erasable. You can grab a calculator if you need it. And then I like to add some color coding. It's not necessary, but again, I'm kind of a visual person. So part of this system that really worked for me was to add the color coding and to make some of the tracking more visual. So take that or leave it, whatever works for you. So I just grabbed some of my mild liners. Of course, you can make it prettier. You can do all kinds of things. So the very first thing I did when I was trying to establish this basic budget for myself was to grab a blank piece of paper. I think it was a dot grid. I'm going to set these aside for just a minute. We'll go through these in a second. And all I did was sit down and go through the last month in my check register and list out any of the bills that I knew I had recurring every month. And I do have a few bills just like this, and these are just examples. This is not my actual budget. These are not my actual numbers, but I just wanted to make something kind of simple that we could go through together. So for instance, we do have a recycling and trash company that bills us quarterly, but it's a small enough amount that I feel like I don't need to have a separate sinking fund for that. I can just know that once every 3 months, I'll have to come up with that $75 in our budget for the trash and recycling. But other than that, I just listed out the bills based on the date that they were paid so that I knew as I go down my list, I'm going through the month. I listed the amount, and one of my tips is to do budget billing if you can. So like your electric bill, your gas bill, these are companies in our area that I can set up a budget billing amount, which really helps when you're trying to set up a budget because those amounts won't fluctuate. And as a sidebar, I should say, in our household, my income fluctuates, my husband's does not. You may be a household of one and your income fluctuates, or you may have a steady income. However it works for you, this is what I came up with because I kind of needed to account for both his steady income and then my fluctuating income. So anyway, I listed out all of our bills and I noted what was an automatic bill and what I have to go in and manually pay. Another tip I have is set them up to be automatic if you can. It does alleviate one less thing you have to keep track of each month, and it's just helpful to know that those things are already taken care of. Now, having said that, I think that there's some times where you may not want to set it up automatically. For instance, the house payment, like in our case, I need 2 paychecks to pay the house payment. And so I want to make sure that both paychecks have gone in before I transfer the funds and pay for that house payment. And we'll get into that more in a little bit, but just keep in mind, your goal is probably to have all of these automatic if you can, but when you're starting out, you may not be at that point. So I like to note which ones were automatic to help me remember as I was going through the month. And then I just made columns. You could certainly just start now in July and make a column for July through December and see how the system works for you through the second half of the month. And I just blocked out the months that I don't have to pay this quarterly bill, and you could do that if you wanted to. And the thing that was really helpful for me at the beginning was then to add up what these fixed expenses were, just to see my monthly total for my bills. So that was helpful for me to see that this was the bare minimum that I needed to be covering with our income each month. The next step that I did was to think about things that are only paid once or twice a year and that I consider are high priority. They're things that you have to have. It's not Amazon Prime, even though I love my Amazon Prime, but I could truly do without Amazon Prime, but I have to pay my insurance. So I also got out our insurance bills and I looked at when things were due so that I could mark out and know just the months that I had to come up with those amounts. So for things like our home insurance, we only pay that once a year. And so I took whatever that number was divided by 12, and that gave me a monthly amount that I would be needing to save. Same thing with our car insurance. If you have it set up where it's paid every 6 months or quarterly, however it's set up for you, come up with that number, divide it by the amount of months you would have to save before it would be due again, and that's your monthly amount. So that way I had my fixed expenses every month, and I also had a bare minimum sinking fund amount. So these are amounts that I know I just need to keep saving each month until one of these bills rolls around. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'm not a financial guru, so I'm doing the best I can to explain my system in a simple way. So together we have this $2,800 that we know is our monthly amount for expenses. Now this doesn't include things like gas for your vehicles or groceries, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but those are things that are fluctuating. So these are the basics that are not fluctuating. So then this tracker helped me as I went through the month, because I would just note every time I either made the payment or the automatic payment came out of the account, and that let me keep good handle on what bills were still upcoming and what had been paid, as well as my sinking funds. Once I got to the end of the month and I knew I had made those $475 weekly payments, then I would mark that I had transferred that full $300 to my insurance sinking funds. So hopefully that's clear about how I used this bill tracker as I went through each month, and that works alongside with the next page. You can just work from this and a check register. That was what I started with, and I just took my bills and I started with whatever I had in my checking account that day, and I listed out the upcoming bills. And if I was doing this on the first paycheck of the month, then the way my system is now, I would have had half of my monthly house payment saved, and so I would need to transfer that back into this working checking account. So I would have my bills coming out that I know, and then what I like to do with my color coding is anything in blue tells me it's not the final number. It's my estimated amount that I'm using to budget with, but it is going to change once that event happens. So I had my total for all my fixed expenses, and then I accounted for some groceries that week and some fuel, gas for the car that week, and what was left. And this is what I do too, is if I have several transactions that are all guesstimates, then I won't list the total each line. I'll just do a final total at the bottom that's in blue. So that tells me that that amount is definitely going to change. It's not the final number. So initially, this is all I did. Every week I would go in, I'd look at what was in our checking account. I would list my bills coming up based on the date, and I would account for some groceries and some fuel. And then as the week would go on, every day or so, I would go in and adjust what I knew. So let's say I got groceries. So I'm gonna change this to be a black line item, and my groceries ended up being, let's say 105. I'm just gonna make it up, okay? So then I would adjust my final number, my running checking account total for that. And then I needed to change this as well. So let's say that same day I did get gas, and my gas ended up being $55. So I would take that out as well. So that leaves me with the 100. And then I might have made a stop and gotten something from Walgreens or some little treat or something. So then I would add that in as well. Say that was $10, just to make it easy. So that way I could keep up with the running total of what was actually in my checking account, but I knew that I had already accounted for all of my bills. So even if they hadn't come out yet, they were still accounted for. And this gave me a really good picture of where our money was going, but it also allowed me to be careful not to go crazy at the grocery store if I knew I only had $90 left. So hopefully that makes sense. These were my two things I started with: my list of my bills and sinking funds, and my running check register. So now that we know the basic system, I'll show you just another step that you could add if you're someone like me who's kind of a visual person. So after a couple of months of doing it that way, I decided I wanted to try to get a little bit better handle on the total monthly budget overall, and I wanted to be able to see it on a calendar view. So then I got one of these Jane's Agenda monthly calendars. I believe this is the executive monthly insert, and it has a place if you wanted to do your bills here, you could, but I like having my overall annual bill tracker that it just have one page. I don't have to rewrite it, but you could do projects and goals. You can use that site if you want to, but you don't have to. So then what I did was I took my color coding markers and divided out the weeks based on the paycheck that comes in. So every Friday, my husband gets paid from his job with the amount that doesn't change, and I get paid from one of my jobs with the amount that does change. So once again, I put that amount in blue, which signifies to me that that is not the final number. That's just what I'm budgeting for and what I'm guesstimating it's going to be. And I highlighted that week to show me that everything that's in orange is going to be coming in or going out within that week. So I did that through the whole month. And this week is highlighted just to remind me that some of these things are coming out of the previous week's budget. Then I also went through, because I wanted to see how our income was finishing up at the end of the month. So my variable income is listed as income number 2, so that way I could go through and adjust these numbers based on what I actually got paid. And let's say you have a third job, and that one you only get paid twice a month, so then you could account for that here, and same way maybe that's variable. So these could be your actual numbers, and when you get paid you would go through and actually write in that final number and adjust it here. And I also like to add these little, you could do the dot markers, or I just use the same square chisel tip from the mild liners, but you can just make a check mark to tell yourself when those items actually came out or got paid or got transferred, whatever the case may be. So this also helped me when I was looking at my paycheck budget ahead of time. This just gave me that extra level of seeing it visually and helping me see if there were some weeks where I had multiple bills coming out that I needed to make sure I was really careful with our grocery spending, or if there were things like the house payment. So this is a good example to show you that. So my house payment, let's say it's due on the 1st, but I have a grace period of 15 days. So that lets me know I could use 2 paychecks to accumulate enough for that house payment. So that means the last paycheck of any month, I'm going to set aside half of my house payment in my sinking funds, so that then the next paycheck, which would be the first one of the month, I'll have the remainder, and I'll be able to put the 2 together to make that house payment and still have something left in the budget for that week. So that was the next step for me, was just seeing the visual and having a better picture of what my income looked like each month and how my bills were coming out. I did not account for anything like groceries or gas on this calendar page. This was truly just so I could see my pay periods and my income and my fixed expenses. And then, like I said, I had my check register basically that I was using, and this, you wouldn't even have to get these inserts. These are from Jane's Agenda. They're great. You can also get them in a horizontal style if you prefer to have a little more room to write. But when I initially started this, it was just a lined piece of paper, and I made myself some columns to be able to track things. And I did like to go in, and as things came in to the check register into the checking account, then I would check them off that yes, those were officially done, they'd been accounted for, like this was the final number, you know, that just told me where we were along the running total there. So I hope that was helpful for you to see this basic budgeting system as a great simple place to start, where you're just truly accounting for what's coming in, what's going out, and it helps you get a better handle on your day-to-day budget and your weekly amounts that you need to account for. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, I'm not a financial expert, so I'll do my best to answer, but I'm just really sharing the system that was something I could keep up with when I was first getting started with a good budgeting system. I'd love to know what works for you with your budget, if you are all digital, if you do some things on paper and some things digitally. And other than that, thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button down below. And I will look forward to seeing you on Tuesday for my Tiny Tidy Tuesday video, and Friday for another Beautifully Organized in 52 Weeks video. Take care and have a good one. Bye.